Good morning. Welcome to Connection Valley Church on Zoom. We're so glad to have you with us today. If it's your first time, we want to let you know that it is our mission to influence people to life-giving connections with Jesus, their family, and the community. One of the ways that we do this consistently is we partner with organizations in our community that are already doing great work, and we just come alongside and offer financial support and also volunteer support for their ministries. And whenever someone visits with us for the first time or attends with us for the first time, we make an additional $10 donation in their honor. So when you guys invite your friends and they show up, it is already going toward making an impact on our community for those kinds of life-giving connections. So thank you so much for inviting your friends. Thank you guys for showing up. And for those of you who give financially so faithfully, thank you so much for being generous with your finances so that we are able to do things like that in our community and be a part of great work that's already happening. Our community partner this month is World Relief. They are an organization that works predominantly with refugees, and the refugees come from all over the world. And we're really excited to be partnered with them again this month. And there's an exciting opportunity for those of you who are local. I want to let you know that this is coming up. And if you're not local, it's great for you to know this as well. There is an international festival happening on June 25th. That's the last Saturday of this month. And so we are able to volunteer with them. There are all kinds of ways you can volunteer. Some of it is with setting up and tearing down. Some of it's with serving food. There are just all kinds of opportunities. And so if you check out our social media pages, there are links where you can sign up to volunteer for that event. So we are excited about that, getting to be a part of it. Brian and I are going to be participating in that, and really just excited to get to do that. So that is one of the tangible ways that we are able to help World Relief this month with their international festival. And so, yeah, that is very exciting. We also want to let you know that this summer we are doing our very first Vacation Bible School, VBS, for our preschool through 6th grade. And this is open to all kids. So if you have friends, neighbors that you would like to invite to be a part of, we would love to have them. It's June 21st, 22nd, and 23rd from 9 a.m. until noon, and it is a completely free event. There is a sign up for it. So again, you can find that on our social media pages and I believe on our website as well. So that way we can know that those kids are coming. They can just get registered and we'll be all set with all the information that we need so that we can take care of them during those 3 hours that we have them together. So again, for those of you who are generous with your finances, you make it possible for us to do things like that, to offer an opportunity for kids to come into an environment where they can learn about Jesus and learn about the most important connection they can have in their lives. And so we think that is a big deal, and we are glad that we get to be a part of that together. So today we start a new series that Brian and I were just talking about. If you were in before, we're very excited about this series, and I'm glad that you could be with us here today. So to get us started, I'm going to hand it over to Jim, let him lead us in singing and worship, and we invite you to sing along aloud wherever you are.
Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the Son sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, he has ransomed me, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God. forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Oh, the sun sets free. Oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
All right. Well, have you looked back at your life and evaluated times where life was one way and then it was another way? And what I mean by that is, as you reflect in your life, there are events that happen that life is one way, and then the event happens, the milestone happens, and then it's completely different after. And I was thinking about this idea when I went from being in 8th grade to 9th grade, because like I was going to be big time going from middle school to high school. And some of you may remember back to how you felt moving up and being in the big leagues. And like for me, like I was so excited about basically being around, well, high school girls, right? I know it sounds pretty pathetic, but that's where my 8th going into 9th grade mind was. It was all about the high school girls. And I remember driving to the high school orientation with some of my buddies. And we thought we were the stuff. Like we, I still remember unbuttoning like a top button, maybe the top 2 buttons, you know, having the shirt open to show off, well, nothing. And then putting on the sunglasses, and we like literally had the same pair of sunglasses with the same buttons unbuttoned on our shirt. We looked the same. We looked ridiculous, but hey, we were going to impress the ladies. And so I remember my 108-pound soaking wet self walking into the hallways of Roswell High School back in the day going, man, life is different. And it really was different. But looking back, I still kind of make fun of myself because, well, I was a little bit pathetic. But some of you remember back, and like for me, as I continue to look back at my life, I'll look at things that happened. And like, for instance, when I got my car keys to my car that I was driving, and I went from being a passenger all the time to then tasting the freedom of driving, it was a clear before and after experience that I absolutely loved. I love the idea of just being able to jump into a car and go where I wanted to go, buy whatever food I wanted to buy whenever I wanted to, back when I was 16 years old. And some of you can remember that freedom you felt too. Like life is different. It's no longer the same because now I have car keys and I have a car. And with that came a lot of freedom. And then there was high school graduation, which we just experienced in our family with our 3rd oldest child, Mia, graduating from high school. And so for her, she's never going to have to go back to Ragsdale High School as a student. And I can tell you, she's very pleased about that. And so for her, that graduation was a significant before and after for her. That life before as a student at Ragsdale is gone. It's over. It's done with. And now her after is taking the next steps toward college. And I remember that for me too. And then like later on, fast forwarding to getting a big boy job. And I remember when I had my first big boy job, making, well, not really big boy money, but I had a big boy job. And then around that same time period, about, maybe a couple of years before that, I had met this young lady who was absolutely beautiful. And you're hoping I say her name was Brooke, well, because it was Brooke. And so I saw Brooke for the very first time and met her. Like, life was different after I placed my eyes on her, and then had the subsequent conversations, to then when it eventually led to going on a first date, and then more conversations. And it was like, there's life before Brooke, BB, there's now life after Brooke, AB. And my life was completely different, and led up to getting married and moving into a house where I had to pay rent with my big boy paycheck, which again was not a big boy paycheck. And so that was different, having to take responsibility for all the bills. There's like life before all the bills, and then life after, when you're now paying the bills. And then I fast forwarded to then when I had my first child, when Micah was born. Life changed dramatically. There is life before kids, like BK, and then there's life after kids, AK. And I remember just thinking, like, man, this is amazing and surreal. And I know things are different. I don't know how they're going to be different, but they were different. Like, sleep changed a whole lot. And some of you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And well, a bunch of other things changed too, and a lot for the good, mostly for the good. And then we had our second kid. And so we went from like being able to team up, and like one person would be on kid duty, then like we have two now. And the second one is completely different than the first one. And again, some of you understand this dynamic. And so there's life before with one kid, and there's life after with two kids. And then we had another kid, and people were like, why don't you get a TV in your room? But we had the third kid, and it was a girl. So she was different than the two boys. And so there's life before with two boys, and now life after with two boys and a girl. And then we had another kid, and there was like life with four kids. And we've gone from like way back in the day, man-to-man defense, to now we're like in a full-out zone. We're like calling in like reinforcement and bench players, and moms and dads and family members who have jumped in to help us navigate this new normal. And then we moved from Georgia to North Carolina, and there's life before with when we lived in Georgia, and now there's life in North Carolina. And it's like, okay, things are a lot different. And as I talk back on my history and my experiences and just that flurry of words, a lot of you understand the idea of what life was like before something happened and what life is like after. Some things we control, and well, when it comes to the reality of life, there's a lot we really don't control. And then there's like these massive events that happen that affect all of us. It's not just like me getting my car keys, or me getting married, or me having a kid, or me getting a big boy job. It's things like 9/11 and being on an airplane before 9/11, and then getting on an airplane after. And some of you probably remember what it was like to get on the airplane before 9/11, when you could just pretty much walk on the airplane and it was pretty like easy. And then after 9/11, well, you have to like take off half your clothes. Sometimes they got some random stranger that then wants to frisk you, and well, that's uncomfortable. And that hasn't made for a really great experience going to the airports. One of my least favorite things to do. And a lot of that was created by what happened on September 11th, 2001. And it's something that most of you can remember. You remember where you were that day, because it was a significant life event that changed the after with what happened. And it was never like it was before again. It hasn't been since. Now, fast forward to a more modern time, not 2001, but 2020. And a lot of you can remember the things that were happening in March of 2020, because we were introduced to the coronavirus, or COVID-19. And like anytime you hear it now, it's like, oh, I think most people are just like, oh, I'm so over it. And some people are still getting it, and it's just like, oh, like it's still around, like it still is here haunting us. And we just see signs of it and remnants of it all around us. And so there was life like before March 2020, and before coronavirus, and before COVID-19, and now there's life after, and it has not been the same. And you all know this because, well, we've lived it together. And then there are things that are just maybe a little more specific to you and me. And it made me think back to when I was in middle school again. Like a lot happened to me in middle school. And it's weird when I reflect on my life because there are certain things that really stand out to me. And usually they're painful. They're like really the highest of highs or the lowest of lows. And then there's stuff in between. A lot of times I don't even remember. Like, for instance, I don't remember fourth grade at all. That's really strange to me. Like, I wish I could go back and remember something that happened in fourth grade. I remember nothing. It's like a flat line. I remember third grade. I remember second grade. I don't remember fourth grade. Like, I'm thinking, did something traumatic happen to me in fourth grade? I don't know. But I will tell you this. Between my seventh and eighth grade year, I experienced some trauma. And you're asking, Brian, what was that trauma? Well, I'm glad you asked. Between my seventh and eighth grade year, my parents moved from one city to another, and I moved from one school to the other. And the thing about that was significant is at my old school and in my old neighborhood where we lived, well, I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of connection. I had this comfort level where, man, like, I knew I was accepted. I felt safe. And life was good. Like, it was simple. And you know how it is. Like, when you're in middle school, you're already going through weird changes where, like, your voice changes, and you know what I'm saying without me being too graphic. It's just life changes, and you're like, I remember my voice started doing that. My mom and my dad and my family, they all made fun of me, which caused some trauma. But between the seventh and eighth grade year, we moved to this new neighborhood. And I went from what felt like a safe neighborhood with good friends to what felt like a very unsafe dog eat dog neighborhood. And I'm not saying it was like the streets of Compton or anything, but it felt bad. It felt like, oh man, life has changed. It's not safe anymore. It's different. And so I began to develop this elaborate defense system to make sure that people couldn't hurt me, to keep people at arm's length and make sure I wasn't vulnerable, because I didn't want to stand out, because like the boys that were in this neighborhood, it was kind of this Lord of the Flies type mentality. And one incident really stands out to me that didn't necessarily affect me directly, but it let me know that I've got to be careful because I could really get hurt. And it was at the middle school bus stop when I was in eighth grade. And I'd never really ridden the bus before. I was pretty entitled up to that point because my mom and dad would take me to school, but I was now going to the bus stop. And I don't know about any of you guys, but the bus stop is not a great place to be. Like, there are some things that happen that are really bad. And I remember that first day at the bus stop, it was all boys. And there were probably 7, 8 of us. And in a situation like that, where there's no adult supervision and you've got a bunch of pretty much middle school boys, there's a pecking order that begins to take place. And I was a newbie, so I was trying to stay under the radar because I learned very quickly that it was not a safe world. And there was one kid in particular who was like at the bottom of the totem pole, and his nickname was Arm, A-R-M. And the reason his nickname was Arm, as you might imagine, is he was really skinny. Like, he was freakishly skinny. I do remember that. At least that's what my eighth grade brain remembers. He was really skinny, and he wasn't quick-witted. He wasn't good with words. And so he was like the target, and kids would push him around. They'd make fun of him. And I remember thinking, somebody should do something about that, but it's not going to be me, because I know that whoever steps into that gap, if anyone were to, would then become the target. At least that's what I told myself back in eighth grade. And unfortunately, it's not really a good story, because the kid got picked on and treated horribly because he was skinny and because he couldn't defend himself and because he wasn't good with words. That sounds like a great reason to treat someone bad, doesn't it? No, of course not. But that's the way it was. That was the world I went into. And I share that with you because as we look back in our lives, we can identify experiences where life was one way before, and then something happened. Maybe someone hurt you. Maybe someone left, and life was different after. And it pretty much threw like a grenade into your life. and blew holes in you and your emotional well-being, your maybe even your spiritual well-being. And maybe you are still reeling from it. Like we've even found this morning, and just some of the conversations we've had with some of the people we've already interacted with, is that there's a lot of hurt that we can carry. And sometimes we're not even aware of it. But there are things that happen where life was one way before, and then it was dramatically changed afterwards. And some of the things that like happen now and even currently in 2022, I mean, they can just be just hurtful. Like, for instance, have you ever been ghosted before? You maybe had a relationship with somebody, you thought they were your friend, and they just cut you off, like they just disappear. Like it's like you're dead to them, and you don't even maybe know what happened. Maybe you have an inkling, but they won't even talk to you. It's like they lost your phone number. I don't know about you, but yeah, I've been ghosted before, and don't even know why. Maybe you've had that experience. Maybe you've been canceled before. Maybe you've canceled somebody else. That seems to be a pretty popular term in 2022. And I really, just my opinion, quick soapbox here, a lot of the canceling I see take place seems so unnecessary to me, because it's based on some like arbitrary moral code that people have, and they just decide like, we're going to not only cancel somebody for saying something maybe they said 15 years ago, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't be held accountable, but to the point where it's like, we're just going to bury their life in a hole, and they're never going to be able to make a decent living again, or they're never going to have any kind of platform ever again. Like, canceled, you're done. Like, you have no hope for the future. And that's just, man, that just seems really just wrong to me. But we see that happen, and maybe you've been canceled by somebody. Or how about this? How about being cheated on? You ever been cheated on before by someone that you trusted in a romantic relationship, where you thought you guys were, together and through thick and thin, and then you find out, maybe by checking a text message, looking at somebody's phone, looking at something that happened through Facebook Messenger or some other form of social media, or maybe you found out through a friend that this person's cheating on you. Or maybe it's not like a romantic relationship. Maybe it's like a friendship where you've had a close friendship with somebody, and then you find out that they've done things to betray you. They've betrayed in confidence. They've said things about you that you would never think they would say about you, because, well, they were your friend. Like, you trusted them, but they went essentially and they drug your name through the mud. And in some ways, like, they were duplicitous, and they kind of cheated on you in one sense by treating you one way to your face, and then a whole another way with someone else. Or how about this? How about being lied to? You've been lied to? I once heard someone say that if you are talking to a teenager, when words are coming out of their mouth, they're lying. And I think that's a little bit harsh, but there is some truth that people are lying to us constantly. And really, from a general standpoint, probably doesn't bother us as much. But when you think about your loved ones, the people that you love the most, how does it feel when they lie to you or break a promise? And as we process through that, one of the things I've discovered is that our capacity to love somebody, like you think about your family or your closest friends, your capacity to love someone is equal or sometimes less than your capacity to hate them. Because there's so much feeling that goes with your love for someone. And so when they betray you, or they hurt you, or they cheat on you, or they try to cancel you, or they ghost you, it's easy just to want to hate them, like to jump to that, because the emotion, the heart's involved in a way that's different than just someone who maybe you don't have a strong connection with. Or maybe there are words that have been spoken to you that maybe a father spoke to you, or a stepfather, or an ex-boyfriend, or a boyfriend, or a girlfriend, or a mother or a grandmother, that have stuck with you for years, that were not good words. They were hurtful words. They were cutting words. You'll never measure up. You're a disappointment. I cannot believe you did that. You are like the worst of the worst to me. You ever had anybody say anything kind of like that to you, where the words are just so cutting and hurtful, like you cannot forget them? And sometimes when you're by yourself and you're reflecting on what happened in that moment that changed life and your perception of this person afterwards, like you meditate on that, and maybe on some level you've believed it. I think all of us have had hurtful words spoken to us and over us. How about hurtful actions? Like we've talked about some hurtful actions, but maybe there are actions beyond what I've talked about today, where people have done things to you, and said things about you that you can't unsee, you can't forget. And when you think about them, man, you want to make them pay. Or how about holding grudges? It's kind of a different spin on this, but have you ever done something to somebody and like what you did was bad, but like their reaction is way over the top, and you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and like they like want to bring down the hammer on you? I mean, that's an indication of hurt. Like, right, we know that hurting people hurt people, but wow, there's some people that are holding some grudges. And let me just say this: all these things I've talked about, they feel extremely weighty. And I don't know what you're holding on, but this is what I do know. When I think about me, when I think about you, when I think about us, is that there are people connected to the hurt. There are people connected to the pain. There are people connected to the feelings of bitterness that we can have. And these people consist of family members and step family members and ex-family members and family and I'm sorry, friends and ex-friends, and they consist of coworkers and ex-coworkers and bosses and ex-bosses, and they consist of classmates and ex-classmates and neighbors and ex-neighbors. And if you think about who has hurt you and how they've hurt you, boy, I can just feel like a 500-pound barbell on your back, like a 500-pound giant rock on your shoulders that you're trying to hold up, and it's just pushing you down. And here's the thing about forgiveness that's so interesting, because we're doing a series on forgiveness and how to forgive the things you can't forget. Is C.S. Lewis said this very well. He said, everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. Have you noticed that to be true? I'm going to read that one more time to you, because I think this is a fantastic quote. Everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. I think it's real easy for me to say, yeah, you should forgive, especially when I'm not emotionally triggered by something that happened to me. But you're like, but you don't know what he did. You don't know what she did. And you're right. I don't know. There are things that he's and she's have done to me too. And it's like, when I think about it, it's like, ooh, I have to set them free. Like they should pay, right? And wouldn't it be great if I could be the one to make them pay? I'm kind of kidding, but I'm not. Like, we have those feelings inside of us because all of us are made of the same stuff. And it's one of the reasons why I love God's word so much, is because when we read his word, things come alive, truths come alive that don't otherwise come alive. And as I've read through his word over the years, he's revealed things to me time and time again that, wow, I need this to set me free from the things I believed that were not accurate. But yet so often I think my way is better than God's way. And so in my natural self, apart from God, I want to go my own direction. I want to be independent, and I want to be independent of God, and I want to be independent of people. But when it comes down to it, that's not really a full life. That's a very lonely life. And sometimes people think that God's word is confining. And while there may be certain principles that if we put into action may in some ways feel confining, when in reality, God's word actually frees us to be the people God made us to be. And one of my favorite writers in the Bible is a guy named Paul. And a lot of you are familiar with Paul because, well, he wrote more books of the New Testament than anybody. And one of my favorite books that he wrote, which was originally a letter, is the book of Ephesians. And he wrote this letter in the first century, like a long time ago, But the words in this letter speak directly into what we're experiencing in the 21st century. They speak directly into who we are. And so he wrote this letter for this specific church and people, a series of churches in the city of Ephesus, groups of churches. But it also applies to us too, because it was included in the Bible and scripture through meticulous meetings of guys coming together and identifying these writings from the first century by people who knew Jesus and walked with Jesus. And so he writes this in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 through 24. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 22 through 24. He says, you were taught with regard to your former way of life. Now get this, to put off your old self. Put off your old self. Now, what is the old self? If you look through the New Testament scriptures, you see clearly that the old self is the old nature, the sin nature. Now, where does that come from? I think it's important to note that going back to the beginning of time in the creation narrative, we see in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, we see kind of how this all happened, where you had God creating men and women with free will, with choice, and they had one rule, and they ultimately broke that rule, and they fell from innocence and grace and ended up becoming sinful. And from that point in time, every person that's been born of a man and a woman has been sinful, and they've been dealing with the old self. And he writes here that the old self is being corrupted by what? If you don't have this in front of you, then you don't know what he's writing. But he says, being corrupted by its deceitful desires. What does it mean to be deceived? It means to be tricked. Have you ever been tricked before? I have. I've been tricked before. I mean, like the first thing I think about is I've had people be duplicitous with me. Like they act one way to my face and then they act some other way behind my back. And I know that you've probably had that experience before. Deceitful desires come from the old self. They come from the corruption of the old self. The old self rests inside every person. Now, some of us, our old self is really the self that we go by, the self, that the part of us that naturally responds to things the way we think we should naturally respond. But that self is being corrupted by deceitful desires, by being tricked. And let me ask it this way. Have you ever thought you wanted something or someone only to get that something or someone and go, oh no, what have I done? You know, well, what have I done by getting connected with this guy? And some of you are like, I want to blame it on the alcohol. But no, in all seriousness, you've gotten connected in relationship with a guy or with a girl, and you have regret because you were tricked into thinking they were one way, but they were actually another. And sometimes we feel like we want something so badly, and once we get it, we realize we were deceived, that what we actually got wasn't what it promised to be, or they weren't actually who they promised to be or who they said they were. And so then he gives us a contrast based on the new nature that a person receives when they receive Jesus, when they put their trust in Jesus. This new nature comes with the gift of God's Holy Spirit, which he gives us the power to then live out the rightness of God, the righteousness of God, the holiness of God. And so in this latter part of Ephesians 4, 22 through 24, he writes, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. And so he says, put on the new self, take off the old self. So when you've received Jesus, there is a conscious effort when you say, hey, I'm going to follow Jesus. Like, I believe in him, right? And I'm made right with him when I believe in him and I become one of his children. But to be a child that actually walks with him means that I have to put on the new nature, that day in, day out, that hour by hour, minute by minute, I get to make a choice on whether I listen to the old self or walk with the new self. that I walk according to God's Spirit, which is he reveals who he is through his word and through the person of Jesus. And so the thing about deceitful desires is deceitful desires make us think that, like, for instance, revenge is going to be a good option when someone hurts us. Have you ever felt that way? Like, if I could just get them back and make them feel what I feel, then I'll be okay. But let me ask you this. How many times have you gotten revenge on somebody and then you were fully satisfied with getting that revenge and felt like the release of the weight? I know that maybe temporarily you felt some satisfaction, but I know the truth is that long term, revenge doesn't satisfy you. But the old self, corrupted by the deceitful desires, tries to convince you and me, tries to trick you and me into believing that revenge will take us down the path we want to go. But have you ever been around somebody who's all about getting revenge? What are they like? Do you want to be married to someone who is all about getting revenge? When you think about the wishes you have for your children or your best friends, do you want them to be characterized by revenge? I don't think anybody who'd say, like someone say, I think revenge is awesome. You'd be like, you're a psycho. Like, no one wants to be characterized by that. No one wants to be in close proximity and friendship with someone like that. But for whatever reason, our old self, if we allow our old self to lead us, will corrupt us. And let me tell you like this way. One of the ways that I remember this is when I go work out, I wear specific clothes to work out. And one of the things about this time of year is that it's really hot outside. And one of the things about being hot and working out is that you sweat a lot. And there's not like AC in my CrossFit gym. So when it's like 90 degrees outside, it can be warm. And when I work out, my clothes get soaking wet right now, which is really gross. But that's not the grossest part. The grossest part sometimes can be the smell. Like I've heard a friend call it the bink. Like if you say, man, someone's got the bink, that's a bad smell. And so sometimes there are shirts, and here's like one of my shirts, and you can't really see everything about it, but at the top it says CrossFit Postal. And this is a shirt from Boone, North Carolina, where App State is. And I've been up to CrossFit Postal to work out with Micah. And like when this shirt, when I wear it, and right now, this time of year when I work out, it gets so nasty, but I really like it because I like how it fits and it's a great workout shirt. And then I also have these shorts I like, and you can't really see the full picture of these shorts because we don't have that capability here on Zoom. But these are some of my favorite shorts. They're so comfortable and they're awesome to work out in. And after working out in them this time of year, they get absolutely soaking and don't always smell the best. And I have my socks that match. And so these get nice and wet and smelly. And then I have my shoes here that don't smell like roses either. And they get kind of nasty. And so when I get done at the gym working out, one of my first things I want to do is I want to take a shower. I want to get cleaned up. Like I want to smell good. I want to get clean. I want to get that junk off me. And so I take those clothes off and I'm like, I sling them. Like I'm like ready to put them in the hamper. And I get in the shower and I get out and I go back and get the dirty clothes and I put them back on because I want to be efficient. I don't want to waste the time of having to wash them. I know it's kind of weird, but I don't want to waste water and I don't want to waste electricity. I'm just kidding. I don't do that. That's weird. If you believe that I would do that, that's weird. No, I don't put those clothes back on. I leave them in the dirty clothes hamper and I put on fresh, new clothes that smell good. And I do it because the old clothes that I was wearing when I was working out are no longer suitable for wearing. And in a similar way, our old self isn't suitable to lead us in the direction we want our lives to go. Like we will really stink to other people by when we walk by the old self, as opposed to putting on the new self That is to be like God in true righteousness, right living, and holiness. Holiness means to set apart. It means to be sanctified or holy. And when we're set apart, we actually serve, or we are actually seen as light in the darkness. And what people need to see more than ever in this world is they need to see light in the darkness. And we show our light by how we love. And if we're holding on to the old self and the deceitful desires and the things that come with all that, we can't be light. We just look like everyone else. And our light is dim and it's dark. And darkness doesn't bring about what we need to see. No, we need light in the darkness. And so when it comes to forgiveness, a few verses later, Paul writes some of my favorite words. He says, to get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. Now, when you think of the words of get rid of, I mean, one of my favorite ways to illustrate this is when I run into a spider web, I do everything in my power to make sure I don't have like a big mama spider on me ready to like inject venom. Like I'm like, like I want that off me. And what Paul is writing here is in a similar fashion, you want to get rid of bitterness and rage and brawling and slander and malice, because what he knows is that's all byproducts of the old self and the deceitful desires that come with that. And look at this another way. Do you know people that are characterized by bitterness or rage? Like it just takes like a little spark to light their fire and they explode. Or slander, like they can't stop talking negatively about other people that bother them and just tearing them down. Or brawling, like they're ready to fight. I mean, they're ready to put on the gloves and duke it out in a heartbeat. Or malice, hatred, like that's just, do you know people that are owned by that and owned by that old self? Do you like being around them? If I were to say, hey guys, make a face that demonstrates a person that's bitter, that's full of rage, that's slanderous, that I'm gonna make sure I don't leave one of these out, that is a brawler, that hates people, like make a face. I mean, it's like that's scary right there. That's ugly. You don't want to see that again. That's not what you want your life characterized by. But when we choose to hold on to bitterness, when we choose to say, you know what, you wronged me and you still have to pay, and I'm going to be the one to bring about that, or I hope you, whatever you fill in the blank, that's what your life then becomes characterized by, the old self, the deceitful desires, tricking you into believing that you're going to get some different result than what you actually get. But then he gives us a contrast here. He says, instead, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ, God forgave you. That's so significant. Like you got the hardness of the bitterness and rage and all that comes with that. And you got the tenderness that comes with compassion and kindness and forgiving like Christ forgave us. And when you think about hearing those words, what does that do to your body and your shoulders? Like if you think about kindness and compassion and forgiving like Jesus forgave you, there's a relief. There's a weight that's lifted from your shoulders. And as I was thinking about Jesus, how did Jesus forgive me? How did Jesus forgive you? Well, the way he forgave us is he did it by making a really bad trade, a really, really bad trade for himself in one sense. You see, he took on what we deserve. He took on what we deserve, the punishment we deserve for the sins that we commit in our old nature and our old self. And he took that on himself and died for those sins. Did we deserve it? Nope. Is that fair? Nope. But he did it anyway Why? Because he loves us. And we see incredible love demonstrated when we forgive, even though it's not earned or deserved, because Jesus modeled what it means to love by sacrificing himself for you and me, so that we can have a relationship with God the Father by trusting and believing in him. And this is where this really got real for me. In September of 1996, I had been living a life that could not be characterized as following Jesus. I would say I believe in Jesus. I have a relationship with him. I'm one of his children, but I wasn't following. I was definitely a wayward child. But September of 1996, I had a life-changing experience with God and really through the person of Jesus, and realized how much he forgave me and how much he loves me, and that he took on my deserved punishment on himself so that I could be forgiven. And I really realized that on a deep level and decided I'm going to follow him. And guess what began to happen? My life began to change. And sometimes he would lead me into doing things that were kind of hard, like forgiving other people. And he began to disassemble the elaborate defense system I'd created going back to my childhood to try to protect myself, to try to keep people out. He began to dismantle that. And he began to set me in a new direction that ultimately led to me being a pastor. There's no way I'm doing what I'm doing today without his work, his power, his forgiveness. And so he began to lead me to forgive other people, even though they may not earn it or deserve it, because that's what he did for me. And you may have been with us a couple of weeks ago when we interviewed a couple guys named Prince and Francis. Prince and Francis are from the countries of Rwanda and Uganda. And these two guys came in and shared about their story, and it was incredible. But they were part of the same tribe, the Tutsi tribe, which reminds me of a chocolate chewy candy, but that's not how it's spelled, not the same way. So the Tutsi tribe, and the Tutsi tribe is originally from Rwanda. And in 1994, the president of Rwanda was flying in an airplane, and he was part of the Hutu tribe. And he was flying in the country of Rwanda, and his plane got shot down. He was assassinated. And someone blamed a Tutsi for committing this horrible offense. As a result, the Hutus decided they were going to kill anybody who was Tutsi. And so they went out with all kinds of different weapons, machete being a weapon of choice quite often, and decided they were going to kill as many Tutsis as possible and anybody who sympathized with them, because there were some Hutus that said, no, this is wrong, we shouldn't do this. But in the process, back in 1994, there were 800,000, hear that number, 800,000. That's huge. That's like Bank of America Stadium being filled up at least 10 times. All those people massacred because of an accusation against one of their people killing the Hutu president. And that's horrible. But then, like, there's some stories I've heard this past week about people who are part of that have blown me away. And when I tell you this story about this particular man and woman that you see on your screen, I think it's going to give you a different perspective on forgiveness, because they're having a conversation right here as neighbors and friends, which makes no sense in light of what has happened in the past. Because you see, the man that you see on your screen, he murdered the woman's husband that you see on the screen with a machete. He diced him up. Horrific. And he went to prison, and he found Jesus. And he eventually got the opportunity to be released from prison and asked this woman for forgiveness. She made the choice to forgive him. And the reason she said she forgave him is she couldn't hold the anger anymore. The anger was owning us. And now they live as neighbors. And I hate to almost tell the story in one sense, because I know I can't do it complete justice, but I want you to just think about this for a second. Imagine the person you love the most. And you're like, well, I don't have just one person. Okay, imagine your top 3 people you love the most. Imagine if someone murdered them in a very horrific way, then later found Jesus and came to you and asked for forgiveness. What would you do? And what this woman realized as being a follower of Jesus is that wasn't her place to be his judge. And she laid it down and she said, the anger that I have toward him is not allowing me to be the person I want to be. And so I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to walk in the new self and I'm going to forgive him. And now, extraordinarily, they live as neighbors. They are friends. And I share this with you because do you think she ever forgets that this is the man that murdered her husband? There's no way. There's no way she could forget that. Like every time she sees him, she would have to be reminded of that. Yet, she made the choice to forgive back then, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, because forgiveness is a progressive process. I make the decision to do it, and then I do it again, and I do it again. Just like putting on the new nature, I put it on. I have to make the choice to do that day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, because if I don't, I will be deceived by the old self and be corrupted by that. Now, we're certainly not done with this journey. Over the next few weeks, we're going to continue talking about this because what I know about you and me is that we all struggle with the old self and the deceitful desires that come with it, specifically when it comes to holding grudges and being bitter. But this is what I want to challenge you with today, to take one step in forgiving someone who has hurt you, to say, you don't owe me anymore, not because of anything they've done. I mean, they may not even ask for forgiveness, but because of what God did for you and for me through Jesus. He gives us the way and the reason. And what I'd love to do is pray for you that you would forgive just as God forgave you through Jesus. So would you join me in prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you for extraordinary examples of forgiveness and that life can be still good in the after, even when the event that happened to change the before was horrible. You bring good out of bad all the time. And we thank you for Jesus and for the good you brought out of the event of his crucifixion. I thank you for his resurrection. I thank you for the power that we now have to walk with you because of him. I thank you that he made that trade. And I pray as we sing this song, that these words will sink deep. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love, good to all. All who call upon you, you will rescue and forgive. This is why I live. You lived a life I could never live. You died the death, all that I deserve. You rose to life and now you live. This is how you forgive me. In your mercy, I'm unworthy of your love. And I'm running back to all I have in you, my gracious King. This is why I sing. You lived the life I could never live. You died the death, all that I deserve. You rose to life and now you live. That's how you forgive That's how you forgive. You live the life I can never live. You died the death, all that I deserve. You rose to life and now you live. That's how you forgive. You live the life I can never live. You died the death, all that I deserve. You rose to life and now you live. That's how you forgive. The measure of your love. You came and died for us. Let us not forget. That's how you forgive. The measure of your love. You came and died for us. Let us not forget. That's how you forgive. You forgive. You forgive. That's how you forgive.
Jim, I want to say that was a great way to end our large group time today. So thank you for choosing that song. I feel like it was really perfect and appropriate. I know we talked about that earlier today, but man, I just had to say it again. So thank you for that. Also want to communicate to you guys that next week we'll be talking about the two parts, the two aspects of forgiveness that can make it extremely difficult to forgive. So that's going to be part of what we talk about next week. So I encourage you to be there, be here, and invite a friend who maybe you think could benefit from this.